Hey guys, welcome back to 4M Training. We are delighted that you're with us. Today we talk about a subject that you just can't put off any longer, the subject of procrastination. Now, some of you may have perceived procrastination as your spiritual gift. You just know that you do it all the time. But the truth of the matter is, it's not only destructive, but it's a sinful behavior that we want to learn to gain victory over. What most people don't understand is that the Bible talks a great deal about procrastination and actually gives us some of our inward motivations for why we're doing that. The first thing you're going to notice is in Matthew chapter 25, our text reminds us that there were 3 stewards that were given something from their master, and then he went away, the text says, for a long time. That means that they had a long time to invest the talents that were given to them. Now, we tend to hear the word talent, and we tend to think of something like maybe a gift or an ability. But in the biblical times, a talent was actually a specific amount of money. If you had a talent of silver, it was worth about $384,000. But if you had a talent of gold, you were talking about $5.7 million. That's a lot of somebody else's money to mess with. The first man was given 5 talents. He had roughly $29 million. The second man was given 2 talents. He had $11 million. And the final steward was given 1 talent. He had $5.75 million. Just think about that. Now, the first 2 men began to invest their talents or their money immediately. But the third steward didn't. And when the master returned after being gone for a long time, he asked the steward what he had done with the money. And you may remember the story. The steward says that he was afraid, so he went in the backyard, dug a hole, buried it, and returned it to him, the master, because it was his money. Just think about this for a second. If you gave somebody nearly $6 million to invest, and all they did was bury it, and they never invested it, there's a good chance that you probably would be as upset as the master was. But the inward motivation for a procrastinator is found in this passage. For there we read, he also had received the 1 talent, came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. Here it comes, verse 25. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. The first thing that we understand about procrastination is that often it is motivated internally by fear. Now think about this. Perhaps the steward felt inadequate. He might have said, this is too difficult, so I'm going to put it off and it will get easier. But nothing ever gets easier when we put it off. Or maybe there was a memory of a past failure. Sometimes I struggle with that. Because you failed before, you'll do it again, so don't try now. Both of those internal motivations are generated by fear, whether a fear of inadequacy or a memory of a past failure. Fear, you see, is the struggle that procrastinators have internally. There's also something else we struggle with, found over in James chapter 4. I like to think that pride is the overconfident optimist. The procrastinator gets comfortable believing that tomorrow will provide a better opportunity than today. In fact, in James 4, in your notes there, I just want you to circle one little word. There we read, Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Look at that word or found between today or tomorrow. The procrastinator, you see, thinks of today and tomorrow as equal, but they're not. You do have today, but you don't know about tomorrow. You could have put a different word in there, today and tomorrow. There's so much work that I'll need to do it today and tomorrow. Or you could have put the word but in there, not today, but tomorrow. But when you use the word or, you're saying I could do it today or I could do it tomorrow. The procrastinator is prideful and always assumes that he's going to have more time than he actually does. There's a good chance you probably have a few of those stories in your life if you're a procrastinator, like I've struggled with that from time to time. Maybe you started a task and then you put it off, and then when you finally got back to it, you thought you'd have enough time, but you didn't. One of the first steps in overcoming procrastination is to no longer see today and tomorrow as the same opportunity, because they're not. And then finally, there is an issue for all of us, I think, where laziness can become a stubborn enabler for us in overcoming procrastination. Just think about it. Fear is working internally. Pride also is working. But so is laziness. And the Proverbs say a great deal about that. But I want to take you to a different passage in Genesis chapter 41 and take a look at procrastination from the perspective of the Egyptians. Now, you may remember this story. This is this incredible story where Joseph has been imprisoned for a significant amount of time. He is brought out of prison, and Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh wants help interpreting that dream. Only Joseph can interpret that dream of all the wise men in the kingdom. And Joseph, who is not an Egyptian, interprets the dream on behalf of Pharaoh. And then he gives Pharaoh advice in how he should handle the remaining years. Now, the dream went like this. There were 7 incredible stalks of corn, and they grew up, or stalks of wheat, rather, and they grew up, and then impoverished wheat grew up also and devoured them. And the same thing happened with cows. There were these really fat cows Pharaoh dreamed about, and they grew up and ate and were satisfied, and then 7 really thin and scant cows came along and devoured those. And Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh by saying, listen, Pharaoh, these 2 dreams together means that God has made up his mind about this. And what's going to happen is you're going to have 7 fruitful years, and then you're going to have 7 impoverished years. Learn to save in the fruitful years. Now, this dream gives us several instructions about procrastination and how we are prone to laziness. Here's the first one. The procrastinator must remember that God is sovereign, and he is not. We're not sovereign over time, only God is. I notice in Genesis 41 that the text starts by saying, after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. 2 years after what? 2 years after Joseph had been told that when 2 prisoners left the prison, they would remember him. For 2 years, he continued to remain in prison, though he wasn't there for a result of anything that he had done, while he still grew in his steadfastness in the Lord, so that when given the opportunity, he would be ready. The procrastinator must remember that God is sovereign and we are not. Here's the second one. The procrastinator must see time as an opportunity to prepare for the future, not simply indulge in today's pleasures. Notice what Joseph said to Pharaoh, verse 34. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during these 7 plentiful years. See what he just did? He said, listen, we need to plan for the future, so let's start acting today. We'll save a bit from the people all the time throughout the plentiful years, so when we hit the impoverished years, we'll be in good shape. The procrastinator must see time as an opportunity to prepare for the future, not simply indulge in today's pleasures. And finally, note this. The procrastinator must develop a useful plan for whatever time remains. That's why Joseph said, the food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. See what he just did? He said, listen, here is a plan for what we're going to do with the time that remains. Now, what's instructive here is that the Egyptians didn't do that. The whole nation that had great years, their gardens were plentiful, their fields just produced bumper crops. The rest of them didn't do that. Instead, they just sold their grain to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh put it in a silo to sell it back to them during the impoverished years. And that's the last lesson that the procrastinator must grasp. The procrastinator must understand that there are unavoidable consequences if he doesn't prepare in advance. And that is why, by the time you get through the 7 impoverished years, the people of Egypt have not only given up all their money to buy back the grain that they had given to Pharaoh, but now they've sold their wives and their children into slavery, and now they've actually sold their land. Pharaoh owns everything at the end of the process, because if laziness gets involved, the procrastinator is enabled to continue to procrastinate. All of us struggle with it to some degree or another. Let me give you your life application question for this week, something to start to work on. Is there a task, a confrontation, or a personal goal you've been putting off due to a sense of inadequacy or past failure? Remember, that's the fear factor. Which one will you do this week? Which task, which confrontation, which personal goal will you begin this week? turn to your Minister Inside and Out pages and spend some time talking about that today.